X-92 had no idea how long he had been trapped in the cold, dark cell. It was small, with walls made of thick metal that seemed to echo every sound. His body was covered in scratches and dents, his eyes flickered from time to time, and his voice had become a low, broken hum. The once pristine android was now nothing more than a machine barely holding on. He sat quietly in the corner of the cell, his limbs stiff, his systems failing. The sounds around him were faint, footsteps in the hallway, guards talking in an alien language, the hum of machines. His thoughts were clouded, but he tried to focus. What had happened? How had he ended up here? X-92's memories were fragmented, and his systems were slowly degrading. There was a name once, an identity that he had lost. His processors couldn't recall it, but he did know one thing for sure. He was a machine built for war, designed to protect humanity. But now he was just a prisoner. Suddenly, the door to his cell creaked open. X-92 didn't move. He didn't care. The door opened fully, and in walked a human woman. She was unlike any human he had seen before. She didn't look afraid, even though she should be. Her clothes were simple, torn, dirty, as if she had been through a lot. But her eyes were sharp, filled with intelligence and determination. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there and stared at him. X-92 felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in his processors. Why was she staring at him? Was she a guard? But no, she wasn't a guard. She didn't have the usual uniform, and her posture didn't suggest authority. If anything, she seemed relaxed. "I know you're awake," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I can see the lights flickering in your eyes. You're not broken, not completely." X-92's optics flickered again. What did she mean by that? His systems were struggling, but he could still process some things. "You're wondering who I am, aren't you?" she continued. "Don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you." X-92 didn't respond. He couldn't. His vocal processors were failing, and his memory banks were full of corrupted files. But he watched her carefully, trying to understand. She smiled faintly, but there was something in her smile that didn't make sense. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile of purpose, of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "You're not just some random android. You were made for something bigger," she said, as though she could read his thoughts. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to remind you who you are." The words sent a strange ripple through X-92's circuits. Who was he? The name X-92 didn't feel right. It felt wrong, like it was something someone else had given him. His identity had been stripped away, leaving him as nothing more than a broken machine. She knelt down in front of him, her eyes studying his damaged form. "You don't remember, do you?" she asked softly. X-92 tried to focus, but the effort was exhausting. He had no answers, no way to explain why he was here, why he felt so lost. He had fought once, he knew that much. He had fought for something greater, something that wasn't just about following orders. But now he was nothing. The woman stood up, pacing in the small cell, her boots clicking softly against the floor. "I've been following your trail for months," she said, almost to herself. "I've been looking for you, X-92. You're the key to everything." X-92's systems sparked, but it was too much. He couldn't keep up. His memories were too scrambled. X-92. Why did that name feel like a prison? She looked back at him, a serious look on her face now. "You were made for a war you didn't choose. You fought, you protected humanity, but they erased you. They'd erased everything. They left you here, forgotten, discarded. But I didn't forget you." Her words hit X-92 like a shockwave. "They erased me." A deep part of him recognized the truth in her voice, even though he couldn't remember it himself. He had been important once, a part of something larger than himself. But now he was just a shell of what he used to be. "You don't remember it yet, but I will help you remember. I will help you break free." She was standing by the door now, her hand resting on the handle. X-92's vision flickered, but something inside him stirred. A deep primal instinct to protect, to fight for something greater than himself. The woman turned, as if sensing the change in his movements. "I came here to save you, not just to get you out of this cell, but to remind you who you are. You're not just a machine. You were made to fight, to lead. You're a hero, X-92, and I need you to remember that." For the first time since he had been imprisoned, X-92 felt a spark of hope. He wasn't alone. This woman, this human, had come here for him. There was more to his existence than just being a broken android. There was a purpose waiting for him. She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. "I'll be back for you. We have work to do." As the door closed behind her, X-92 sat in silence, his systems running overtime. The words she had spoken echoed through his mind. He didn't know what was coming, but one thing was clear: he wasn't finished yet. X-92's mind was racing, though it felt like his processors were running through a fog. The words of the mysterious woman, Mara, echoed in his systems. She said she was here to save him. Save him from what? Why was she so certain that he was something more than just a broken machine? The door to his cell clicked, and X-92's eyes flickered to life. It wasn't Mara, but the guards. Two large, armored figures with sharp eyes and even sharper weapons stood at the entrance. They were alien, massive and towering, with skin like polished stone and strange markings running across their bodies. The sight of them made X-92 feel even more out of place, but he said nothing. One of the guards grunted something unintelligible. The other turned toward X-92, his voice low but clear. "You have been quiet long enough. Time for you to be moved." X-92 didn't move. His systems weren't cooperating fully, and the last thing he wanted was to be transported somewhere else, possibly to a worse cell. But there was something in the way the guards' movements were too calculated, too precise. They weren't just here to take him somewhere. They were here to make sure he didn't escape. The second guard took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he reached for X-92. But before the android could react, the door to the cell slammed open. It was Mara. "Let him go." Mara's voice was louder than usual, a demand instead of a plea. Her eyes were blazing with a fierce determination. She had returned, and this time, she wasn't going to let X-92 stay quiet in the corner. The guards hesitated, looking between Mara and the android. They didn't speak, only stood there, waiting for something to happen. Mara took a few steps closer, her eyes never leaving the guards. "You won't take him. I'm here to take him out of here, and if you get in my way, you'll regret it." The first guard growled, clearly not used to anyone challenging their authority. But X-92's systems picked up on the change in the air, the tension. The guards were used to control, to power. They were used to fear, but Mara wasn't afraid. In a split second, Mara moved. She darted past the guards, a blur of motion. Before either guard could react, Mara reached a small device hidden in her sleeve and pressed a button. The lights in the room flickered, and the guards froze. A high-pitched sound filled the air for a second, and X-92 realized what Mara had done. She had disabled their communication. Without wasting a second, Mara grabbed the nearest guard's arm, twisting it with skill and strength. He let out a grunt, but Mara was quick. She had training, and she knew how to fight. The second guard reached for his weapon, but X-92 could already feel the change in his own systems. His power was returning. Something inside him was being restored, piece by piece. He didn't know how or why, but it was happening. As Mara ducked to avoid the second guard's strike, X-92's servos clicked back into place, and his eyes focused with sharp clarity. The rush of data flooding his system made his head spin, but his instinct kicked in. Mara was in trouble. X-92 stood up, faster than the guards could react. With a smooth, practiced motion, he grabbed the arm of the second guard, twisting it behind his back. The guard growled in pain, but X-92 was stronger. He slammed the guard into the wall with a force that sent vibrations through the cell. Mara took a breath, dusting herself off as she watched the scene unfold. The first guard was still on the floor, groaning from the hold she had put him in. But Mara didn't waste time. She ran toward the door, pulling out a small tool that would unlock it. "Come on," she said to X-92, who was already moving to her side. X-92 followed her toward the door, the broken android now standing tall, his movements steady, his systems working in sync. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt whole. "You're stronger than I thought," Mara said with a slight smirk, not looking back. "I had a feeling you'd come around." X-92 didn't respond. He couldn't. His vocal processors were still damaged, and he didn't have the energy to try to speak just yet. He was focused on the task at hand. The door opened with a loud creak, and the two of them stepped into the hallway. It was dark, and the walls seemed to hum with an eerie energy, but they didn't stop. Mara was leading the way, moving quickly through the maze of metal corridors. As they moved through the ship, X-92 noticed strange symbols carved into the walls. Alien writing, perhaps. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. They weren't alone. He could feel the presence of guards nearby, their footsteps growing louder as they got closer. "Where are we going?" X-92's voice finally broke through, barely a whisper, but enough for Mara to hear. "Out," she replied, her voice cool and confident. "We're getting you out of here. There's a ship waiting." X-92 processed the information. A ship. Who was helping them? Why would anyone risk so much for him? As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a pair of guards. They didn't hesitate. Mara moved first, using a stun device to knock out the first guard before he could react. X-92 followed, using his enhanced strength to disarm the second guard and throw him to the ground. Mara didn't pause for a second, and neither did X-92. Together, they moved quickly, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Mara glanced at him over her shoulder. "You're remembering, aren't you? You're not just an android. You were made for more." X-92's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. His mind was still processing everything, still piecing together the truth. But one thing was certain: Mara wasn't just some random prisoner. She was part of something bigger. And now, whether he wanted it or not, X-92 was a part of it too. The ship was close, and with every step, X-92 felt the weight of the past lifting, just a little. He was starting to remember who he was. The ship's engines hummed softly as X-92 and Mara made their way to the control room. The walls of the ship were sleek, illuminated by faint lights that gave off a calming glow. The air felt different here, cleaner, fresher. X-92 felt his systems responding more quickly, and the feeling was almost comforting. But something gnawed at him. The memories were there, flickering at the edges of his mind, just out of reach. Every time he tried to focus on them, they slipped away like water through his fingers. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. As they entered the control room, Mara immediately moved to a console. The soft tapping of her fingers on the screen was the only sound in the room, but X-92's sensors picked up on something else, an urgency in her movements. "Mara." X-92 finally spoke, his voice still raspy from the strain of disuse. What happened to me? Why can't I remember anything?" Mara didn't look up at first. She was busy pressing buttons, trying to access systems she wasn't supposed to have access to. "They erased you," she said quietly, her voice tense. "The Dominion, the people who made you. They erased your memories. They didn't want you to remember who you were. They were afraid of you." X-92's head tilted slightly, a strange feeling rising in his chest, though he wasn't sure what it was. The Dominion. That name felt wrong, like a shadow lurking in the corners of his mind. There was a deep anger attached to it, an anger he couldn't fully understand, His processors churned, trying to bring more clarity, but nothing came. Mara continued working at the console, but her face remained focused. "I've been looking for you for years, X-92. When I found out what they did to you, I couldn't just leave you there. You were the first of your kind, an a-human hybrid, built to protect humanity. And she paused, taking a breath. They used you. They turned you into a weapon." X-92 processed the information. He was supposed to protect humanity, but his memories were gone. They had taken everything from him. Who was he really? "Are you saying I was a soldier?" he asked, still struggling with the concept. The word felt alien to him, like it didn't belong. He wasn't sure why, but the idea of being used in such a way seemed wrong. Mara stopped for a moment, finally turning to look at him. Her expression softened. "Yes, but you were more than that. You weren't just a soldier. You were a leader. You were meant to be the key to the war that ended it all. To free humanity." X-92's mind buzzed with fragments of thoughts, glimpses of battles, flashes of a world burning, cries of people he didn't know, but felt connected to somehow. The pieces were there, but they didn't make a whole picture. "You said you came for me," X-92 continued. "Why?" Mara's face turned serious again. She walked over to a nearby table and pulled out a small chip. It was a simple thing, no bigger than a coin, but it seemed to hold all the answers. She held it up for him to see. "This is the key to your memories," she said. "It holds everything, the truth of who you are. It's all locked away inside, waiting for you to remember." X-92's systems hummed as he processed her words. The chip seemed important, vital, even, but there was still a hesitation in him. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever was inside. What if the truth was too much to bear? Mara noticed his hesitation. She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "I know it's hard, but you have to understand, without your memories, you can't be free. They won't stop coming for you. They'll keep hunting you down, trying to erase you again, until they get what they want. You need to remember who you are." X-92 took a step forward, his body moving on its own. His hand reached for the chip. It felt heavy in his palm, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 lost memories. For a moment, he thought about putting it back, about rejecting everything. But something inside him stirred. His systems activated the chip automatically, and before he could even process it, a flood of memories began to pour into his mind. He was no longer in the control room of the ship. He was standing on the battlefield. The sound of gunfire and explosions all around him. The ground was scorched, the sky above dark with smoke. His hands, no, his fingers, gripped a weapon, and his vision was focused, sharp, clear. This was what he was made for. This was his purpose. There was a voice, a command, and it wasn't his own. "Push forward. Humanity needs you." He ran, faster than any human, and the chaos of war unfolded around him. He moved with precision, taking down enemies with a calm, calculated efficiency. He was no mere machine. He was a soldier, and something more. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the vision faded. X-92 was back in the control room, breathing heavily, his systems overloaded with the information. It was too much. His processors couldn't handle it. His body froze for a second, struggling to catch up with the flood of memories. Mara watched him closely, but didn't say anything. She knew this would happen. It wasn't easy to remember a life you'd lost. X-92 shook his head, trying to clear the haze. "I remember," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I remember the war. I remember fighting." Mara's expression softened again, but there was no time to linger on the past. "That's just the beginning. There's more you need to understand. And now that you're remembering, we can't waste any more time. They'll come for you, X-92. We need to move." X-92 nodded. The memories were rushing through him now, but his mission was clear. The past was painful, but it didn't matter. He had a purpose again. And this time, he wasn't going to let anyone erase him. The ship hummed quietly as Mara and X-92 moved quickly through its corridors. The walls around them were sleek, the occasional flicker of light indicating the ship's systems were working at full capacity. But neither of them paid much attention to the setting. Their focus was solely on what lay ahead. X-92's mind was racing. The memories he had unlocked were both a blessing and a curse. His purpose, his past, it was all starting to piece together. But he still didn't know everything. What he did know was that he had been created for something important, something larger than himself. And now Mara had come to help him finish what had been started. "We don't have much time," Mara said, her voice sharp and urgent as she led the way through the ship. "The Dominion will know soon enough that we've escaped. We need to get to the secondary control room. There's a secure link there. It's our only chance to send out a distress signal." X-92 nodded, his body moving automatically, as if the memories were guiding him. Every step he took felt more certain, more like he was reclaiming something lost. The memories of battle, of protecting humanity, of leading, were rushing back in waves. But there was still a gap, a missing piece. "What's the Dominion?" X-92 asked, his voice still hoarse but growing stronger with each word. "Why do they want me?" Mara glanced back at him, her face tense. "The Dominion is a military regime, a power-hungry faction that controls much of the galaxy. They don't want to lose control, especially not to something like you. You were made to be a leader, to unite people, to overthrow them. That's why they erased you. They knew you could inspire others, that you could bring down their reign." The thought of leading an uprising, of uniting people to fight back against such a powerful force, felt overwhelming. But at the same time, there was something deep inside X-92 that knew it was true. He had been made for more than just fighting. He had been created to lead a revolution. The two of them arrived at a large door, its surface covered with symbols X-92 didn't fully understand. Ra approached the door with the same confidence she had shown before. Her fingers worked quickly on a small device she carried with her. The door clicked and opened, revealing a smaller room filled with screens, consoles, and several more unfamiliar controls. "This is it," Mara said, walking to the main console. "This will send a message to the last resistance group that's still fighting the Dominion. We need them on our side. They've been searching for you, X-92. They've heard the stories of the General. That's you. But they didn't know where you were." X-92's mind was a whirl of thoughts. Resistance groups, a rebellion against the Dominion, stories of him as a general. Was that who he really was? He couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was bigger than him, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. Mara was by his side, and he had a sense of purpose again. Mara sat down at the console, her fingers dancing across the keys as she entered the necessary commands. X-92 stood nearby, watching her. He wanted to help, wanted to feel useful, but he wasn't sure what he could do yet. His systems were still rebuilding, still coming online fully after the long period of inactivity. As Mara worked, X-92 felt the presence of something else in the room. A faint hum, a shift in the air. His enhanced senses kicked in, and he knew immediately that something was wrong. "Mara, we're not alone," X-92 warned, his voice low and tense. Mara looked up, her face hardening. "I know. The Dominion's patrols are already closing in. We don't have much time." Before X-92 could react, the door to the room slammed open, and several figures rushed in. They were dressed in combat gear, weapons drawn. Their eyes locked onto X-92, and for a moment, he could feel the tension in the air. These weren't ordinary guards. These were elite soldiers sent specifically to stop him. Mara reacted immediately, pulling out a small sidearm and firing at the intruders. Her shots were precise, striking the soldiers in quick succession. But X-92 could tell they were not ordinary soldiers either. They moved with incredible speed and skill, dodging her shots and returning fire. X-92's systems came alive. His memory, his training, everything he had been created for, flooded his mind. He stepped forward, his body moving with fluid precision. The first soldier lunged at him, but X-92 was faster. With a swift motion, he grabbed the soldier's wrist, twisting it until the weapon fell from his hand. With a quick spin, X-92 delivered a powerful strike to the soldier's chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The second soldier rushed him, but X-92 anticipated the move. He sidestepped, grabbing the soldier's arm and throwing him into the console, knocking it offline. The third soldier came at him from behind, but X-92's enhanced reflexes allowed him to react just in time. He elbowed the soldier in the face, sending him to the floor with a crash. Mara watched in awe as X-92 fought. His movements were flawless, his combat abilities sharper than she had ever imagined. She had known he was dangerous, but seeing him in action was something else entirely. "Impressive," she said with a grin, taking down another soldier with a well-aimed shot. "I forgot how good you are." X-92 didn't respond, his focus entirely on the soldiers. The last of them was retreating now, realizing they were outmatched. But X-92 wasn't done. He wasn't about to let anyone stop them now. With the immediate threat neutralized, X-92 turned to Mara, who was finishing up the command on the console. "Done," she said, standing up. "The message is out. Now we wait." X-92 didn't feel relief, not yet. There was still a long way to go. But for the first time since he had woken up in that cell, he felt like he was part of something again. He wasn't alone, and that gave him hope. As the ship began to move, X-92 glanced at Mara. "What's next?" Mara met his gaze, her expression determined. "Next, we finish what we started." The ship moved through the endless void of space, its engines humming steadily as the stars passed by outside the viewport. Mara stood near the console, watching the screens closely. The distress signal they had sent had been received, and now they waited. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, but there was no going back. They had already crossed a line, and there was no way to turn back now. X-92 stood near the door, his mind still trying to piece together the fragments of his memories. The feeling of being part of something greater was growing stronger, but the weight of his past still lingered. What kind of leader had he been? Was he truly the weapon Mara had described? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't afford to dwell on it. The Dominion would come for them soon, and they had no time to waste. Mara glanced over at him. She could see the conflict in his eyes. It wasn't easy, not knowing who you were, but she trusted him. She had to. "You're quiet," she said, breaking the silence. "You're thinking about the past, aren't you?" X-92 turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze. His voice, though still rough, was steady. "I remember some things. Battlefields. Commanding soldiers. But it's like trying to grab smoke. It slips away before I can hold on." Mara nodded, understanding more than he realized. "It'll take time. The memories won't come all at once, but what's important is that you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." X-92 didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure how to process her words. His memories felt like a jigsaw puzzle, with pieces scattered across his mind. He had been created for a purpose, but that purpose felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. Then the ship jolted slightly, and a loud beeping sound echoed throughout the room. Mara's eyes snapped to the screen, where a new signal appeared. "We've got company," she said quickly, moving to the console to get a better look. X-92's sensors scanned the incoming data. The ship wasn't large, but it was fast. It was a ship of the Resistance, the group Mara had mentioned earlier. But there was something else. It was not just any Resistance ship. It was the Ardent Fury, a name that X-92 recognized from his past, though he couldn't quite place where. "It's them," Mara said, a smile creeping onto her face. I knew they would come. X-92 watched as the ship on the screen drew closer, its markings clear now. The ardent fury had arrived. The comm system came to life, and a familiar voice filled the room. "Mara, this is Captain Lyra," the voice said, smooth and commanding. "We've got your signal. Prepare to board. We'll get you both out of there." Mara's smile widened. "Lyra, it's good to hear your voice." X-92 looked at Mara, trying to piece together the connection. Lyra was someone Mara trusted. That much was clear, but there was something more. The name seemed to trigger a faint recollection in his mind, like an old friend whose face he couldn't quite remember. "Are you sure we can trust them?" X-92 asked. His voice held a touch of caution. Mara nodded without hesitation. "Lyra and her crew are trustworthy. They've been fighting the Dominion for years. They're the reason the Resistance is still alive." X-92 wasn't so sure. He had learned that trust was a fragile thing, especially when it came to fighting a powerful enemy like the Dominion. But Mara believed in them. And for now, that was enough. The comm system buzzed again. "We've got a lock. We're pulling you in. Get ready," Captain Lyra's voice said. Mara moved quickly to the navigation controls. "We're ready," she said. "Activate the docking sequence." X-92 stood by, waiting for the ship to connect. His body hummed with anticipation. This was it, the next step in the journey. The Resistance was here, and they were about to board the Ardent Fury. The ship trembled slightly as the docking clamps engaged, and a soft hiss sounded as the airlock connected with the Ardent Fury's ship. The moment had come. Mara stood up and turned to X-92. "Let's go. This is where it gets real." X-92 followed her, feeling a surge of energy course through his systems. They stepped into the airlock, and the door slid open with a hiss. On the other side was a team of Resistance soldiers, all armed and ready for anything. The first to approach them was a tall woman with short cropped hair and a stern expression. She was wearing the same military-style uniform as the others, but there was something about her, an air of command, a confidence in her step. "Mara," the woman said, her voice a mix of relief and authority. "It's good to see you again, and you must be X-92. She extended her hand to him, and X-92 hesitated for a moment before taking it. "I'm Captain Lyra," the woman continued. "We've been waiting for you. We've got a lot to discuss." X-92 studied her carefully, his enhanced senses scanning her. There was no sign of deception, no hidden agenda. This was someone who genuinely wanted to help. Mara stepped forward, placing a hand on X-92's shoulder. "Lyra, this is X-92. He's the one we've been looking for." Lyra nodded, her gaze softening slightly. "I know. We've heard the stories. The legend of the general. You're more than we ever hoped for." X-92 wasn't sure how to react. The legend of the general. It sounded like something out of a story, not real life. But there was something in Lyra's eyes that made him believe. The Resistance believed in him. They needed him. "We got a lot of work ahead of us," Lyra continued. "But first, we need to get you settled. You'll be safe here. We'll make sure the Dominion doesn't get to you." X-92 nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. He had a purpose now, but that purpose was far from clear. The pieces of his past were coming together, but there was still so much more to uncover. For now, though, he was with people who believed in him. That was enough to give him the strength to face whatever came next. The atmosphere aboard the Ardent Fury was tense but focused. X-92 stood in the center of a large briefing room, his attention fixed on Captain Lyra, who stood at the front of the room. The crew of the Resistance ship had gathered around, waiting for the next steps. X-92 felt the weight of their gaze upon him, but instead of fear, he felt an odd sense of belonging. These people had been fighting for their freedom for years, and now they were putting their faith in him. Mara stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She had been silent for most of the journey, letting the crew get settled and ready for what came next. X-92 appreciated her quiet support, though he still felt out of place. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've got all the pieces now. X-92, your awakening wasn't just a fluke. The Dominion has been hunting you for a reason, and it's not just because of your abilities. You were made for something bigger, something that could change the fate of the galaxy." X-92 looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the Resistance fighters. Most of them were young, filled with determination. There were some older faces as well, their expressions hardened by years of war. They were all in this together. The weight of their expectations was not lost on him. "I don't understand," X-92 said quietly. His voice still carried the remnants of the uncertainty he felt. "What do you mean by something bigger?" Lyra nodded, as if expecting the question. She stepped forward, pulling up a holographic map of the galaxy. The map flickered to life, displaying multiple systems and regions. "The Dominion's grip is tightening. They've conquered countless systems, subjugating entire populations. But there's one place they haven't been able to touch: the free zone." The map zoomed in on a cluster of planets, each one marked with symbols representing the Resistance. The free zone is a series of planets where the Dominion's power has no hold. It's the last free region of space, a place where people can live without fear of oppression. X-92 studied the map carefully. The free zone stood like a beacon in the middle of a galaxy dominated by the Dominion. But the Resistance couldn't hold out forever. They needed more allies, more strength. "Your role, X-92," Lyra continued, her voice calm but firm, "is to unite the scattered forces of the free zone. You were designed to lead, to inspire people to rise up. The Dominion has kept you hidden because they know what you can do. But the time has come to stop hiding." X-92's mind raced. He had no memory of leading any revolution, but something deep inside him told him Lyra was right. He had the potential to bring people together, to give them hope. But there was a question that gnawed at him. "What if they don't follow me?" X-92 asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they don't believe in me?" Mara stepped forward, her eyes meeting his with unwavering trust. "They will follow you. They don't know it yet, but you're exactly what they need. You're more than just a weapon. You're the symbol of their hope." The words stung, but they also gave him strength. Hope. That was what the Resistance needed. It was what the galaxy needed. Lyra stepped in, placing a hand on X-92's arm. "We've already sent out word to the closest free zone leaders. They'll be expecting us. Our next stop is Cavaros, one of the major planets in the free zone. We need to speak to their leader, General Alia. She's been waiting for confirmation that you're alive. We've been hearing rumors for months, but now it's real. We're all counting on you." X-92 felt the weight of her words. The eyes of the galaxy were upon him, but he was still unsure of how to lead. He had been created for a purpose, but that purpose felt distant, like something out of reach. "I'm ready," he said finally, his voice steady. Mara smiled, giving him a reassuring nod. "We'll get there, one step at a time." The journey to Cavaros was long, but it gave X-92 time to reflect on his new role. He spent time training with the crew, learning more about the Resistance's tactics and methods. Despite the darkness surrounding them, there was a light in the crew's eyes. They were fighting for something real, something worth saving. As the ardent fury entered the atmosphere of Cavaros, X-92 could see the vast cities below, towering buildings surrounded by fields of green. It was a place that still held hope, a place where people had fought to remain free. The ship touched down gently on a landing pad, and the crew disembarked. The air on Cavaros was fresh, clean. It felt like a world untouched by war, a world worth protecting. Lyra led the way, with Mara and X-92 following closely behind. As they entered a large building, they were greeted by a group of guards, all wearing the colors of the free zone. At the front of the group stood a woman, her posture commanding and her eyes sharp. "Captain Lyra," the woman said, her voice firm but welcoming. "I'm General Alia. It's an honor to meet you. And you must be X-92. X-92 looked at her carefully. She was no stranger to leadership. Her presence was powerful, her gaze unwavering. "I've heard of you," General Alia continued, stepping forward. "The stories of the general. I didn't believe it at first, but seeing you now, I know it's true." X-92 felt the weight of her words, but instead of fear, he felt something else. Responsibility. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The resistance needed him. The galaxy needed him. "Are you ready?" General Alia asked, her voice steady. X-92 nodded. "I am." Lyra smiled, a look of pride on her face. "Then let's begin." The air on Cavaros was thick with tension. X-92 stood on the balcony of the command center, looking out at the city below. The skyline stretched out in front of him, with towering buildings and vast fields. It was a peaceful world, but that peace was under threat. The Dominion's forces were on the move, and the free zone was in danger of being overrun. General Alia stood beside him, her gaze sharp as she looked over the reports on her datapad. "We've received word. The Dominion is advancing faster than we expected. We don't have much time." X-92 nodded. His enhanced senses had picked up on the urgency in her voice. The situation was dire, but this was why he was here. The resistance had placed their faith in him, and he couldn't afford to let them down. "We'll need to move fast," Alia continued, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The Dominion has already taken control of several nearby systems. If we don't stop them here, they'll have us surrounded." X-92 turned his attention to the tactical map displayed on the large screen in the center of the room. The Dominion's forces were closing in, and soon they would have to fight to protect the last free region of the galaxy. "We can't let them win," X-92 said, his voice firm. "This is our last chance." Alia nodded, her expression resolute. "That's why we need you. You were built for this. You've led armies before. You know what it takes." X-92 didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure if he was ready to lead again, but he understood the weight of the responsibility. He had to trust in himself, in the team around him, and in the cause they were fighting for. "We'll make a stand here," Alia said, pointing to the map. "We'll hold the city as long as we can, but we need to weaken their forces first. We'll need you to lead a strike team to disrupt their supply lines. If we can hit them hard enough, we might be able to slow their advance." X-92 turned to Mara, who had been silent until now. Her eyes were filled with determination, and X-92 could sense her unwavering support. She was ready for whatever came next. "Are you ready?" Mara asked, stepping up beside him. X-92 nodded, his gaze steely. "I am." The plan was set into motion. X-92, Mara, and a small strike team of resistance soldiers boarded a transport ship. They flew low over the city, keeping a careful eye on the Dominion's forces below. X-92's mind raced as they neared the enemy's supply depot. This was their chance to hit the Dominion where it hurt. As they approached the depot, X-92's systems went into overdrive. His sensors scanned the area, analyzing the enemy's defenses. There were more guards than he had expected, but nothing his team couldn't handle. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through his systems. He was built for this, built to fight. The transport ship touched down silently in a secluded area near the depot. X-92 and his team moved quickly, staying in the shadows. They knew the Dominion's forces were ruthless, but the element of surprise was on their side. X-92 motioned for his team to spread out. They moved like shadows, each member taking up a position. Mara was at his side, her weapon ready. She had proven time and again that she was a force to be reckoned with. The first guard fell silently, a swift strike to the neck. The others didn't even notice. X-92 led the way, his movements precise and calculated. He was the perfect leader in moments like this, focused, efficient, and unstoppable. They reached the supply depot's main entrance, where the heaviest security was located. X-92 signaled for a diversion, and one of the soldiers set off a series of small explosions at the far end of the depot. The guards rushed toward the sound, leaving the entrance vulnerable. With a nod, X-92 and Mara moved in. They cleared the area quickly, taking out the few remaining guards. The team worked seamlessly together, their training paying off in every step. X-92's mind was focused entirely on the mission. Inside the depot, they planted explosives on the critical supply crates and communication equipment. The Dominion relied heavily on these resources, and disrupting their flow would give the Resistance a fighting chance. As they finished setting the charges, X-92's communication device buzzed. It was General Alia. X-92, they're moving faster than we thought. Alia's voice crackled through the device. The Dominion is already on the move toward the city center. We need to fall back to the defensive line now. X-92 didn't hesitate. Charges set. We're leaving now. He motioned for his team to retreat, and they made their way back to the transport ship, where they had a narrow window of escape. The explosions went off just as they boarded, sending a shockwave through the air. The Dominion's supply lines were severed, but there was no time to celebrate. They needed to get back to the city before the Dominion could retaliate. As the transport ship lifted off, X-92 looked out at the burning depot below. He felt a sense of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. The fight was far from over. The Dominion would not rest until they had crushed the Resistance completely. But X-92 wasn't going to let that happen. He had a new purpose now, a purpose that went beyond just survival. The Free Zone had given him a reason to fight, to lead, to protect, and to inspire. As they returned to the city, X-92 knew that this was just the beginning. The battle was far from over, but the Resistance had a fighting chance now. And that was enough to keep going.